it is. There's some hiccups, but between the FDIC and some of the other provisions that have been put in place, it's stable. Now, what I'm hearing from some of my more local and regional banks is that they're frustrated with sort of the seemingly two-tier system of bank regulation. And that's something that we are certainly getting at and need to deal with. But first and foremost, we need to make sure people understand their money is going to be safe. Now, what that means is we have some decisions to make. Do we do a temporary increase of that FDIC insurance, for example? And this would be, this would affect a lot of small businesses, certainly seasonal businesses. Think of yourself if you're a small landscaper. And, right about now in February and March, you might not have a whole lot of cash on hand. But in September and October, you might have a lot of cash on hand, and that would exceed that $250,000 insured level. So how do we deal with those kinds of situations? Do we do something temporary? If we did that, we would literally have to go in and have a vote by the House, the Senate, and signed into law by the president. Because right now, what the law says is that you can go on a bank-by-bank or case-by-case basis and do what they declared with SVB, that Silicon Valley Bank, and said, okay, we're going to cover everyone's deposits. Now, having said that, and we want to make sure that we've got the sort of those jitters under control, we have some really tough questions that we need to ask. And was SVB treated differently because of who was behind it, who maybe deposited their money there? Why did BlackRock, of all people, who got brought in to do an analysis, they raised red flags? It was ignored by the bank and the board. The Federal Reserve out of San Francisco raised red flags. It was ignored, but they didn't take the next step. They didn't do anything about it. So we have to ask the regulators what their role in this, in addition to mismanagement of the bank.
So you think it's isolated in those particular banks, or is this more of widespread? We look at the ESG, the woke policies that are there in the banking industry. We have the obviously this almost perfect storm where you've got money that has driven up interest rates or inflation, and then you've got interest rates going up by the Fed. So is it a combination of all these factors, and how do we work our way out of this?
That's the magic question, and we have to work our way out of it step by step. There is no magic wand that we're going to be able to wave here and fix it all. But those issues that you brought up certainly are part of it. In SVB's particular situation, they took an excess amount of cash, put them in long-term treasuries, which at the time were yielding a higher interest rate than short-term treasuries, except we have something called the inverted yield curve right now, where short-term is actually returning higher interest rates than long-term bonds. And having these hold-to-maturity bonds suddenly put a cash strap on them, and they found themselves in a hyperinflationary situation where you've got the Fed dramatically increasing interest rates, where they got caught behind that curve, and they couldn't cover it up. They couldn't make it up by selling assets. So the regulators had to step in. Now the question really is could they and should they have avoided this by getting involved earlier and really looking at that interest rate exposure that they had? And to answer that part of that question, yes, there are a number of other banks that have similar situations, but none that we've really seen with as much exposure as SVB had.
All right, Congressman Bill Huizenga, again, I want to thank you for stepping out of the issues retreat and talking with us today. Always good to see you.
And it's good to see you too, Tony. Appreciate it, and keep up the great work.
All right, thanks so much. Bill Huizenga from Michigan. To find out more, go to the website, TonyPerkins.com. All right, coming up, more Washington Watch after the break. We're going to be joined by Congressman Bob Good, who's down in Orlando as well. The Biden administration is saying, well, more spending. Of course, more spending. But isn't it going to make the situation worse? And what can Republicans do to rein in this spending? That's our conversation next. Congressman Bob Good. Don't go away.
Today, moral relativism and political correctness are assaulting truth. How can the faces a tremendous temptation to deviate from the Word of God.
The God who speaks clearly expresses God's intent in giving us his word and the response that is demanded of those who hear.
Nobody ever encounters God and says, that was boring and irrelevant. When people say that about the Bible, it just says to me they've not encountered the God of the Bible.
Our faith is rooted in history, and consequently we need to use the evidence and never be afraid of it.
The God Who Speaks is a feature-length documentary from the American Family Association, which could bolster your confidence in the Word of God.
Churches really need to see this, really need to understand what the Bible actually is.
Available now at thegodwhospeaks.org.
Here's a moment of hope for your home with Jerry and Becky Trace.
When you listen to the prayers of your children, parents, what do you hear? We often pray that we hear them say, God, give me those types of prayers, you know? Aren't we all, though, a little bit selfish? Listen to Philippians chapter 1, verse 9.
And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in real knowledge and discernment.
It is okay to pray for yourself. As you pray with your family, let your children hear you ask God for your love to be like his love. Lead your family in understanding that all people need to know that God loves them.
It's also important to discern the difference between worldly love and God's love. His love is eternal. I mean, we love pizza and hamburgers and french fries and a sunny day. We love a lot of things, but God's love is higher and reaches deeper. His love is tastier and eternally satisfying.
Learn more at hopeforthehome.org. This has been a moment of hope for your home.
What do we do now? The disciples were normal dudes. Jesus had ascended right before their eyes after teaching them for 40 days about the kingdom of God. He made a promise for a helper and told them to wait on the power of God. So for 10 days in an upper room, they devoted themselves to prayer, waiting for what Jesus had just promised. As followers of Christ, we can't simply plan our way into the future. The only way individuals or churches will thrive moving forward is to seek God and his heart in prayer, believing for that power again. Will you be like that 120 in the upper room who cried out to God for his direction and provision? I'm Kyle Reno, a pastor in Little Rock, Arkansas, and a co-host of the One Cry podcast for OneCry.com.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. All right, more government money pumped into the economy means more inflation, which means higher interest rates to cool off the economy, which is what has destabilized the banking system. But as I mentioned at the top of the program, many in the president's party, the president included, want to spend even more government money. Here's a clip.
He said he wants to put money into universal child care and lifting children out of poverty. And he's already delivered. He's delivered the biggest climate package in the history of the world. So he's got a lot that he's gotten done. He's got a lot that he's doing. We don't agree on everything, but boy, I'm glad he's president.
Yeah, that was Senator Elizabeth Warren yesterday on Meet the Press. Well, the banking crisis dominates both the news and the conversations at the Republican retreat. Other important legislative items are on the agenda as well. These include the debt ceiling debate, government funding concerns, and ongoing aid to Ukraine. Well, this upcoming debate over the debt ceiling, how might that be used to get spending under control? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Congressman Bob Good. He serves on the House Education and Labor Committee and the House Budget Committee. He represents the 5th Congressional District of Virginia. Congressman Good, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Hello, Tony. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me again.
Well, I appreciate you stepping out of the retreat with your colleagues down there in Orlando to join us. You heard the clip I played of Elizabeth Warren. It seems the president's party only wants to add fuel to the fire when it comes to our current situation with the economy and banking.
Yes, Tony, it's really incredible that at an unprecedented level of national debt we haven't seen since World War II, so unprecedented out of outside of the worst war in the history of the world. We are at the present responding to $32 trillion national debt with a record $6.9 trillion budget proposal, proposing to run a record $2 trillion deficit. And the $6.9 trillion represents about $20,000 per American citizen, about $80,000 obviously for a household of four. And for what? How many Americans would vote for their federal government to give them an IOU to borrow and spend, quite frankly, $20,000 on their behalf? And Tony, yesterday, here down at the Republican conference that you were referencing, we were having a discussion on the threat of China and the strength of our military and that sort of thing. But we are poorly equipped, ill-equipped to encounter even a military defense crisis like we did during the Civil War or World War II or what have you. When you enter the crisis, the national threat, the security threat, with that kind of debt, how are you able to fund a ramp up in a war machine if we were ever to face a military conflict like that, let alone our inability to face a financial crisis like we did 15 years ago when you come in with this level of national debt spending? So that my conversations that I've been having is that members understand this and there's a sense of urgency to address this. And you look at some of the intersections where you're going to have leverage to do that, the debt ceiling being one of them. Do you see that there's a coalescing of Republicans in the House to say, hey, we got to draw a line? I do, Tony. I think we're largely united about the goals or the objectives, what exactly that looks like and what are the best strategies or the best ways to achieve it. Obviously that's part of what we're debating here. The good news I can tell you is that the narrative and the conversation has shifted not to whether or not we will cut spending, but how much spending we will cut and how we will cut it and how we'll attack it and what will that look like? How far are we willing to go as a conference? Will we rise to the moment? I was challenging my colleagues just this morning that, let's give our speaker the opportunity to be a historic transformational speaker that is the first speaker in modern times to really lead the House of Representatives to make cuts, to put us on meaningful cuts, to put us on a path of fiscal responsibility, and to utilize the debt ceiling situation as leverage to force meaningful cuts in year one, year two of this new Congress. Is there another point that you would have as much leverage as you would on the debt ceiling? I don't think so, and I think that, in my view, would be that we would get two bites at the apple, if you will, that we will pass something out of the House with significant cuts in the range of, I would suggest, $1 trillion. There's $1 trillion in low-hanging fruit, if you will, just rescinding the student loan transfer scheme, canceling the hiring of 87,000 new IRS agents, rescinding about $100 billion of unallocated, unspent COVID funds, going back to pre-COVID spending, non-defense. I think, Bob, that's an important point to make, is that what you're talking about is just returning the budget to where it was prior to COVID, when all of this additional debt spending was poured into the economy, which is obviously given us the problem we've had. But we're not talking about drastic cuts. We're just talking about returning to where we were. That's right. And at that spending level today, pre-COVID, we'd actually be realizing a surplus because of the extra revenue coming in from the Trump tax cuts. But think about that. Pre-COVID, that was the largest spending we'd ever seen in the history of our country. We already had a bloated government, a reckless amount of spending going on pre-COVID, and then we've just taken it to another level since COVID. So exactly on the non-defense discretionary spending, we want to take that back to pre-COVID. That would be meaningful cuts, historic cuts in modern times. Then what I think we need to do is at the end of the year, when we get back, when the budget funding, the government funding runs out from the omnibus spending bill at the end of last year, then we negotiate more cuts going into an election year. Oh, that's good. But just, I want to make clear again, because, when you come out and say that, the president and others are going to say you want to cut Social Security, you want to cut Medicare. That's not on the table here. Yeah, Republicans are united in saying we've got to get our fiscal house in order, and the reckless spending, and the spending on the climate, environmentalism, extremist stuff, end the DEI, equity, diversity, equity, inclusion spending, end the spending on things that are weakening our military, end the spending on the oppressive nature of our government that's actually harming its citizens, again, the IRS. We ought to rescind any spending for this new FBI headquarters. Why would we spend more money on the FBI to give them a new headquarters building? Let's get our fiscal house in order. Then let's find, in the next Congress, let's find a bipartisan solution to preserve and protect Social Security, Medicare for future generations.
Bob Good, always great to talk with you again. Thanks for taking time to step out and talk with us today.
Thank you, Tony. Great to be with you.
All right, Congressman Bob Good of Virginia. All right, coming up, once again, the Biden administration is looking to dismantle religious liberty protections, this time on college campuses. That's our conversation after the break. Stick with us. Don't go away.
In this new world, on this new day, we rejoice that Roe versus Wade has been overturned. Preborn has been preparing for this moment for the past 16 years by positioning their clinics in the top 6 abortion states where 50% of abortions occur. Sadly, 5 of these 6 states will continue to abort babies at an even greater level. And since the abortion pill accounts for over 50% of abortions, babies are even more at risk. Preborn pregnancy clinics are completely dependent on you as they offer life-saving ultrasounds and the life-saving gospel to moms and babies in crisis.
When I heard her heartbeat, I decided to keep her. And now my daughter's about to be 3. I don't know where my life would be without her.
To learn how you can be a part of rescuing babies' lives and sharing the heart of Jesus, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, is there any evidence that man and dinosaurs lived together?
Yes, indeed, there is, Chris. The Bible even describes dinosaur-like beasts in the book of Job, and Job lived after the flood. Also, we see numerous places where native peoples drew pictures of dinosaur-like beasts. Almost every nation around the world has legends of dragons, huge reptilian beasts that sound very much like our modern-day reconstructions of dinosaurs. Recently, some very interesting burial stones have been excavated from tombs in South America, which clearly show dinosaurs and humans together. These stones date from long before dinosaurs were reconstructed from their fossils. As far as we know, no dinosaurs are alive today, but we have good evidence that dinosaur-like beasts existed along with humans in the not-too-distant past. It all started back in Genesis.
For more on creation, visit our website at www.icr.org.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host. Good to have you with us on this Monday. The Biden administration is once again moving to dismantle federal regulations that uphold religious liberty. Now, this time it's on college campuses. Last month, the Department of Education issued a notice of proposed rulemaking about its plan to rescind what is called the Religious Liberty and Free Inquiry Final Rule. This Trump-era regulation mandates that universities that accept public grants cannot deny funding to religious student groups. They have to treat the religious groups just like any other group. So what's the justification for rolling back religious freedom protections on college campuses? And what could be the result of this rule change? And more importantly, what can you do to stop it? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Travis Weber, Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs here at the Family Research Council. Travis, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
All right, so explain the existing regulation that was put in place during the Trump administration and why it's needed.
Yeah, so the current regulation basically says that colleges have to comply with the First Amendment in order to receive federal grants. And the way it does this, the way the Trump era rule did this was the courts would basically be the arbiters of figuring these matters out, the question of compliance, if lawsuits were brought around the First Amendment, and only when there was a final judgment issued by the courts at some level that the university was not in compliance with the First Amendment would the school be cut off. And so really the rule just looked to the courts and would wait, would wait until litigation played out as as a determiner of whether these schools were in compliance. And the Biden administration wants to roll that back for purposes that it will not perhaps state on the face of its notice of proposed rulemaking. But we are very concerned that this would cause, this is going to cause a rollback of religious freedom protections.
Now, Democratic regulators in the Biden administration say that the rule is not necessary to protect the First Amendment. And here's the justification they use for that. First, they say it's not a problem, but then secondly, they say, well, if the students encounter a problem, they can simply go to the courts and they can sue. That sounds easy, but it's not. You're an attorney. You know how difficult that is. The burden then shifts to the students and not the university.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing about this is it's almost like, I'm reading through the Biden administration's notice of proposed rulemaking, and the concerns that they are stating are leading them to reconsider this. And it doesn't even really make sense, because the current rule looks to the courts. The Trump era rule looks to the courts. And so, the Biden administration and Department of Education is coming in now and saying, we're concerned that this is going to cause a lack of clarity for universities, increase litigation costs. These are concerns that, if they were truly concerns, we would see things being dealt with much differently in other areas. The administration is using a set of concerns here to reverse a Trump era rule. And I'm not really sure, nor should observers of this process be sure, that there's concerns they are stating are the actual concerns here. What they want to do is reverse a Trump era rule that protected religious freedom. And Tony, they're dealing with the courts question that we've been discussing in the current revision. The part about religious groups being able to exercise their faith is being dealt with in another section of rulemaking that the Biden administration will proceed with, not even this current process. So they're certainly dismantling what had been in place, and their stated justifications really just don't hold a lot of water here, don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just, I think, further hostility toward religious exercise, the free exercise of religion on college campuses. It's not like they don't already dominate when it comes to the classroom and the curriculum and the agenda that the left is pushing. This will make it more difficult for students of faith to simply exercise as an extracurricular group that wants to meet on college campuses and be treated the same. So let's talk, Travis, for just got a couple minutes left. What can folks do to weigh in? This is a rulemaking process, which means citizens can speak into this. How can they do that?
Yeah, so the notice and comment period is open now. It closes on March 24th, so later this week. And we have an easy way that people can do that. It's at frcaction.org/ed. So that's frcaction.org/ed. And that will take you to an explanation of what's happening here, some ideas for what you can present to the Biden administration for why you oppose this rollback of a rule that would protect religious freedom. We need to make our voices heard, because they're going to look at what is provided, but they're also going to look at the number of concerned citizens commenting. And this is our opportunity to play a part in the process. And it is what we can do to take action. There are things we can't control, but this is one, you letting the Biden administration know what you think of this, which you can do at that link I mentioned. That is a way that we can play a part in the process. And so we're welcoming everyone to take part in that. We're also going to be submitting our own comment on this from Family Research Council, and do what we can to let the Biden administration know that this is not an acceptable approach when it comes to religious freedom on campus.
All right, Travis Weber, thanks so much for joining us today. Always great to talk with you.
Thank you.
And folks, you can go to TonyPerkins.com and follow the links over and file a comment. Now, it's important, not that the Biden administration is necessarily going to listen. But here's something. It makes it more difficult for them when the overwhelming opposition is expressed. And it does something else. It shows to potential Republican administrations in the wings that this is an important issue that they'll address when they come into power, hopefully. All right, coming up, the Biden administration has turned the Department of Defense into an abortion travel agency. We talk with Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville. Next, don't go away.
It's so important for Christians to learn how to apply their faith to the big issues and questions everyone is talking about today, which is why Family Research Council's Center for Biblical Worldview presents Now We Live, a 6-week video series created in partnership with Summit Ministries. This free Biblical Worldview series will spark rich discussions about some of life's most foundational questions and challenge you to think about topics you see every day in a whole new way. This series is a response to the tumultuous cultural upheaval our nation is currently experiencing. This series features prominent Christian leaders, including FRC President Tony Perkins, Summit President Dr. Jeff Myers, actor Kirk Cameron, author Lee Strobel, and Christian music artists John and Corey Cooper, among others, who highlight why God's truth is the answer to the chaos caused by a woke and broken society. Equip yourself and other Christians to explore what it means to truly hold biblical worldview. Access this important series by going to frc.org/worldview.
What does the American Family Association stand for?
We believe true morality flows from biblical principles and directs people to the manner in which God intends them to live.
These values and more are part of our mission to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. We want to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. Thank you for standing with us as we seek to stop the erosion of godly values. Hey, did you hear? MoneyWise is different. It's now Faith and Finance with Rob West. Don't worry, Rob will still help build your faith while giving biblical advice about your finances. It's just a different name.
From a diversification perspective, I like properly diversified stock and bond portfolio, especially given where the market is right now.
Faith and Finance with Rob West. Weekdays at 9 a.m. Central on AFR, or catch the podcast at afr.net.
Steve Russo with Real Answers. It's spring. It's the season when baseball fever spreads. And it's also a time when thousands of college students nationwide take a break from the books and embark on a no-holds-barred week of partying. Spring break has been the ritual of students ever since George Hamilton appeared in the 1960 romp Where the Boys Are. But that was during an age of innocence. Students nowadays take their spring break seriously, including kegs of beer and bikini contests. There's even a company that specializes in throwing the world's largest party during spring break. But this generation is really no different than previous ones searching for fun and satisfaction in life. They're still looking in all the wrong places. Jesus said, "I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly." True or false, right or wrong, how do you really know? Steve Russo has resources that can help. Log on to www.realanswers.com.
This is Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host. Good to have you with us on this Monday. All right, when I was in the Marine Corps, it's been a few years back, our mission was very clear. Prepare and fight the nation's battles when needed. Our training was exclusively on our military missions. I don't recall any other training that we had other than our primary MOS, or maybe a secondary MOS, but never none of this diversity stuff, this woke agenda. I mean, this military is so focused on this woke agenda that it's crowding out the military's main mission, and that's dangerous. It's undermining national security. But now the Biden administration is taking it a step further. They're transforming military and VA facilities into abortion and, in some cases, gender reassignment clinics. Of course, this fits a pattern of the Biden administration presiding over, this is the most pro-abortion administration in our country's history. And the president is pushing all of this leftist agenda ideology. But this begs the question, why is our military focused on killing the unborn instead of defending the nation? And then to you and I, why does it matter? Well, we're going to talk about that. My next guest is fighting this battle on Capitol Hill, Senator Tommy Tuberville. He is fighting back against these policies. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. He represents the state of Alabama, and he's told the Department of Defense, look, I'm not going along with anything you're doing until you back off of targeting the unborn. Senator Tuberville, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to have you.
Thank you, Tony. Glad to be here.
Now, you have been extremely strong in objecting to this military policy, going to the Senate floor, bringing this up into committee hearings. Tell our viewers and our listeners why you are doing this and what the response has been.
Well, first of all, I'm pro-life. I believe in the sanctity of life. So do a huge majority of the people in the state of Alabama. And that's who I represent. But I got wind being on the Armed Services Committee, Tony, about last summer, that our Department of Defense was deciding on their own that they were going to change the abortion policy within our military. That's done over here in Congress. We make rules and laws here in Congress. This is not left up to secretaries or bureaucrats behind the scenes. Now, currently, our current authority for the department limits abortions to cases of rape, incest, or pregnancies that threaten the life of the mother. Now, that's what we've had for years in the military. But this administration and this Department of Defense decided on their own that they're going to change this. So we kept asking for a briefing on this. We couldn't get a briefing. Well, around Thanksgiving, finally, after pushing buttons and saying, listen, something's got to give here, we want a briefing. Well, they gave us a briefing. And it wasn't anything that what the people of Alabama and most of the people of this country believe in terms of what, number one, our military is for national security. We need to stay out of all these woke policies. And number two, we need to make sure that we do what's right for the people in this country, that elect their leaders and not have appointed leaders make all these decisions. So I heard that they were going to start having pretty much abortions on demand for military members. They were going to let their dependents also have abortions. They were going to spend taxpayers' dollars for this transportation of the military person or dependents. That's not what is in the law in this country as we speak. So they're making up the law themselves. And so I sent a letter to Secretary Austin before Christmas. I said, I hear what you're getting ready to do. If you do this, I'm going to put a hold on all the civilian nominees that come across the Senate and all the flagship officers. And you're going to have to go through regular order, which would take years to do what we can do here in a matter of hours if they do things right. So I did that. I think it was February the 16th that they went ahead with this new law or new policy that they're going to change the abortion policy in the military. And they changed it to 16th and it went into effect March the 8th. And so I went into the whole business as a U.S. Senator, which you can do, and meaning that basically you're going to have to go the long route if you're going to get anybody that comes through nominations of a ranking officer to move up. So they're squirming right now, and they're putting a lot of pressure on me, but I hadn't heard from anybody yet, so we'll see what happens.
Well, Senator, I want to talk about that process, but first I'm going to go back because in this process, you brought forward some information that even I wasn't aware of, honestly, and that was the military. The administration makes these wild claims, and they said that this was a threat to national security by not being able to have women get abortions. Just women still can get abortions, biological women. And I know the left sees things differently, but that's the reality. But you pressed in on that to find out that only 20 abortions are done on average per year. How can that be a threat to national security?
Yeah, well, first they said national security, Tony, and then they turned around and said, well, and it's also hurting our recruiting. I said, wait a minute. It hadn't hurt it before. And now all of a sudden, this poor woke military that you're building, you're blaming it on a few rules that we want to try to keep the same, and you want to make different rules, and you don't know whether they're going to help or not. But first of all, we have had an abortion rule, as you just said, and we went by those three limits, rape, incest, and harm to the mom. And we had 20 or less over all these years, per year of all these years, and there was no complaints. anything. Everybody kind of understood what was going on, but these people are 100% for abortion everywhere. And since Roe Wade now, they have looked for every avenue they possibly can to circumvent Roe Wade. And so this is one of them. So we did a third-party study, Tony, that basically said we're going to go from 20 a year to over 4,000 a year. And so they're going to make a huge jump in what we're doing.
Yeah, that's what I want to make very clear. This is not apples to apples saying, well, they can't, in certain states, they can't do abortions. This is, as you pointed out, creating the Department of Defense to become an abortion travel agency where they're going to be sending people all across the country, and they're going to expand tremendously the number of abortions that the Department of Defense would provide for. And as you pointed out, that's against the law because it is the Congress that determines how the money is spent. They hold the purse strings.
Well, you're exactly right. And in my letter, I just happened to put in there a statement that says, last time I looked, none of y'all in the Department of Defense ran for an office. You weren't elected to Congress to change the rules, the policies, and the laws. That happens over here. And so that's the reason I'm holding them up. They can't do it. And they're saying that they can. We're saying that they can't. And so we're going to see who's going to win out on this. I don't see anybody, beating my door down yet to try to get this changed. But we've got 150 people now that have holes and on promotions right now, and it adds a good number each week. So I'm sure I'll start hearing her pretty soon. But again, let Congress do this.
Yeah.
If it's going to pass, let's go through the right and proper channel. Let's just don't do it on our own. But that's what this administration tries to do anyway.
So, Senator, I want to talk just for a moment so our folks, our viewers, our listeners kind of understand the process. You put a hold on this, meaning they have to go through the regular order, and that eats up a lot of time. So normally if you have unanimous consent, everybody says, yeah, this is fine, and it just kind of goes on through. This makes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this makes requires a vote of the body be held on each one of these. Is that correct?
That's correct. What happens now is we'll get a list of from 10 to 300 officers that need promotion, and they've been vetted. They've gone through the proper channels. We'll bring them to basically a services meeting, and it will go through the Armed Services Committee and then go to the floor, and it passes by unanimous consent. It's never any problem. But now, the one thing you have as a senator that you can put a halt to anything is if you put a hold on any kind of nomination, they've got to go through regular order for each one. And it takes weeks and weeks to get a nomination, and sometimes months for, say, an ambassador, somebody that's got to go through a regular nomination through the Senate, and there's got to be vetted, it's got to go through the committees. And so if they want to drag this out, I'm willing to drag it out. I hate it that people are going to be held up because of some policy that the Department of Defense thinks that they've got priority over. But good luck. We're going to hold on to this as long as we possibly can to make sure we get some explanation. Not saying it's not going to go through,
right?
But they're going to have a tough time.
So two more questions on this, and I want to get another topic in. You mentioned pressure. Are you getting pressure from Republicans to go along with this? Who's putting pressure on you? And how can our viewers and our listeners help? Because I know they want to support you in what you're doing.
Yeah, being on armed services, I talk to the generals all the time, the combatant commanders from all over the world, and I receive calls from them and asking, is there anything that we can do? Not pressure, just coach. Here's our situation. We got these people up. We understand what you're trying to do. We're not pushing you. We just want to know how can we help. And they've been very good. And again, this all goes back to the Secretary of Defense and the people in the Pentagon of communication and going through proper order, proper channel. And I'm sure in the near future we'll speak if they've got a good explanation. Those holes might come off, but they better have a real good one, because right now, I'm standing up for the American people and the process that we go through and why we're here. And why do we even have a Congress if we're going to let an administration just run roughshod over all the rules and policies that we have in place.
Are your Republican colleagues standing with you?
Oh yeah. Now, of course, I've had some of them come to me and ask me, now, tell me what we're doing here. What's your process? Why? And after I get through telling them, I'm sure, hey, I'm with you. And we've got several that have signed on with us.